Welcome back, everyone, to the Disaster Tough podcast, where we share insights into the big plays and right calls of leadership. We dive deep into the stories, lessons learned, and ideas that will help you in the field. Let's go. Welcome back to the Disaster Tough podcast. I'm your host, John Scardena. I am so excited for this episode. I've been wanting to do this for a really long time. I met Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Chip Cooke, maybe over a year ago. Despite all of his accolades, despite everything he's doing, he's a forever learner. And so while I was teaching at St. Louis University, he was taking his very last course. I was expecting him to check out, but of course, in typical Chip fashion, he did not check out. He was all in. He's all in for everything. It's totally impressive of what he chooses to do in his career and in the learning aspect. In fact, I invited him out to the Emergency Management Response for Dynamic Populations course as part of the DEA so that the DEA could see kind of what we were doing. And he was, once again, just a phenomenal asset there as well. And so I've just been wanting him to come onto the podcast. We finally found a time. So without any further ado, Chip, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me, buddy. Always great to be with you.
You know, I wore a suit because I felt like this was the most important moment of my career. So we're looking sharp. We're looking good. You know, the whole deal.
You're looking very government-esque.
You know, I actually went for Men in Black, was just the closest thing I could think of for the DEA. But
good.
Yeah, thanks. All right. So you're in the Chicago region. You're the DEA. You've had a storied career. You have lots of cool stories, lots of cool things you've been working on. For the sake of our audience, a lot of them are emergency managers, firefighters, military officers, the whole deal. And you're really the first one that we've really had from the DEA on here. What is really your scope of focus in the DEA, and what does even Assistant Special Agent in Charge even mean? Can you explain? Can you break all those down for us?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So DEA, we're the Drug Enforcement Administration. We are one of the many agencies that fall under the umbrella of the United States Department of Justice. And our goal and our mission is to disrupt and dismantle drug trafficking organizations locally, regionally, domestically, and internationally, globally. And that's really what Congress pays us to do. That's what we're charged, tasked, and funded to do, is to focus on transnational criminal organizations, drug trafficking organizations, who are all affecting the homeland, as we like to say, right? We're always looking for the nexus back to the United States and how drug trafficking organizations, again, transnational criminal organizations, how they're bringing a variety of drugs, narcotics into the United States, which are eventually and essentially leading to the deaths of more Americans today than we've ever seen in the drug crisis. So that's really DEA's mission: disrupt and dismantle drug trafficking organizations. And we also like to say destroy drug trafficking organizations, because we just don't want to tap them on the shoulder or say, hey, move aside. We actually want them to go away and disappear. Yeah. So here I'm in the DEA's Chicago Field Division. I focus primarily in Indiana, where I sit. And we have 23, we're in the Chicago Field Division. We have 23 domestic field divisions throughout the country and pretty much the large cities throughout the country.
So I have I told you I'd go on tangents. I have an immediate tangent. As you were talking about like the scope and the mission of the DEA, I recalled a training I took maybe back in 2012 in DC or 2013 around time frame. And during that training, it was an unclassified open source training, so there's nothing sensitive. But they were talking about how Iranian-backed terrorist groups were funding cartel groups to get drugs and money into the U.S., and how it was a problem back then of trying to disrupt systems. From your perspective in the DEA, do you guys venture into not just the drugs themselves, but the kind of the why and the disruption of the drugs and what the mission set, not just making money, but trying to destroy i.e. American culture. Do you guys get into that at all?
Well, as you're speaking about this, John, the term that is floating around in my brain is narco terrorism. And we have seen decades of the connection between narcotics trafficking, drug trafficking from drug cartels and their forever link to terrorism. And certainly that continues today. So whether it's Iranian or it's linked to
Wherever.
terrorism in South America, right? Certainly anywhere throughout the Middle East, there is a real because you can make a lot of money from selling drugs, and that money is fueled back to these terrorist organizations to do whatever it is they plan to do. So we know in DEA and the whole of government approach is that narco terrorism is definitely it's a focus of ours, and it's a focus of the whole government.
The L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio at l3harris.com right now. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. I loved what you said earlier when you used the word destroy, like make them go away. Because I was like, well, if this business ever fails, maybe, no, I don't want to be destroyed, so I won't get into our cost. But seriously, like, I love, like, your passion. You've been doing this for so long. And, it obviously, even on the onset here, it's very easy for you to talk about so many different aspects. But I really want to get into, like, you. Because I was so impressed by your demeanor, the way you approached life at SLU. I was impressed by how you approached it at the dynamic populations course. And even now, like, you got me to wear a suit, right? Like, you are just like an all-in person, all-in passion person. I don't really see you doing anything that's not all in. If you're going to do it, you're going to go all the way. From a leadership perspective and teaching people, especially maybe those people who are out there who are burned out. We have a lot of listeners who contact me saying they're burned out right now, but they've only been in the field for like 5-6 years. And I'm like, oh man, just wait. You know what I mean? So it's like, how do you, within your career, keep that passion high in what you're doing?
First of all, John, you're very kind as always. I certainly appreciate those thoughts. And it's funny you mentioned the word passion, because I have said many times over to be an employee at DEA, right? We have a variety of job series in DEA. I'm a special agent, so I'll speak about that. But to be a DEA special agent, and certainly over an entire career, you really need to have that passion. That drive really needs to be in your belly and in your gut for working drugs. And for the passion, right? For, as we like to say, a drug-free America, a healthy, safety, secure, drug-free America. So I probably with any profession, but certainly in law enforcement and public safety, if you have that sense, and it doesn't need to be, totally over the top, but if you have a sense in your belly, in your gut, in your heart that you're called, right? Vocation, if you're called to, if you have that passion for making your community better, helping others, serving others, I'd say yes, there are highs and lows in everyone's careers. I love working for DEA. I've been here. This is my 25th year with DEA. I can't think of working for a better agency. But it's also work at times, and there are highs and lows. And it's that passion that always kind of brings me back to the table, gets me out of bed every morning to say, you know what, even on those tough days, I'm still very passionate about what I do, and that's what the drive is. So burnout in public safety across all of the spectrums is certainly very high. I hear about it in the law enforcement community. But if you feel it inside of you, you know it's there, and you got to stick with it. And they always say, follow your gut. Don't give up. Because right now, certainly in the drug realm, we're losing more Americans than we've ever lost before.
Yeah.
It's a violent world out there. Right now, we need emergency managers, public safety officers, officials to not give up. Resiliency is key, right? In emergency management, resiliency. And it's the same thing with us who are in this world. If you have that sense of passion and you feel like, yeah, I'm in the right area, but I just need a little energy kick, don't give up, because that's a calling and that's a vocation. And that's a part of you that's your fabric. You can't give up on that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I have never been great about separating, and people say to do this, so maybe it's a problem, but separating work with personal, if it really does feel like it's built into who I am. I absolutely love the mission of save and sustain life. And that has been true whether I was in the government, that has been true in the private sector, that has been true when I interview incredible people like you on the podcast. I really want us to get better at it. And I would love a drug-free America. I mean, that concept, it seems so prevalent. You hear about it all the time. I was working out in the gym this morning, and something popped up that happened. It was a shootout that happened over a drug exchange this morning in St. Louis. It's so often it's exhausting in some ways, and I don't want to give up. Right? I want to be all in. And so for those people who are listening and burnout, maybe you're burned out because maybe one aspect of the job you're not focusing on, or maybe you're burned out because you forgot the mission. And I think if we remember the mission and we can remember the people that we're helping, it's very easy to want to be back in. Although, my own caveat here is always mental first aid is very important. You got to take care of yourself so that you can do the mission. But everything you're saying is right. It's on point. So I've already been bouncing around here a little bit, but for the meat of our conversation, and now that we know who you are and how you operate and kind of the DEA in general, I kind of want to go a bit more tactical, if that's all right, for the next 10 minutes or so. I've heard you talk about fentanyl at the border, fentanyl in the United States. Indiana has a lot of problems with that. I've had friends who come from Indiana. I've had people who work in law enforcement in Indiana. Drug problems are a big problem in Indiana and across the United States. And I know you haven't just operated in Indiana. You've operated all over the place. Can you explain for the listeners here who may not have great situational awareness how bad the fentanyl problem really is and why more people are dying now than ever before? And from all drugs, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, right. And that's true. It's very true. So just on the outset of this, when we talk about fentanyl, we are, for the most part, and really all of it, we're not talking about the medical grade or the pharmaceutical grade fentanyl, right? You hear about the fentanyl patches that people wear when they're terminally ill, or fentanyl lollipops, things that come out of a pharmacy. Prescribed to you by a doctor, right? That's not the fentanyl that we're talking about that's killing 70,000 plus Americans a year.
Yeah.
We're talking about what we call illicit fentanyl. And this is a synthetic opioid that starts as precursor chemicals. So chemicals in China sent to Mexico in chemical form, right? So they're not, for China and the chemical companies are, for the most part, not manufacturing fentanyl in China and sending fully manufactured fentanyl to Mexico. Think of it like a gun, right? You're not allowed to send a gun fully constructed through the mail, but the way people who want to violate gun laws, they'll send a piece of a gun here or a piece of a gun there, and then they'll send it all to a location, and then at location, that person will then build the gun. And that's the same thing that's happening with the illicit fentanyl. These Chinese pharmaceutical, Chinese chemical companies, which are, the Chinese government is turning a blind eye to this. They are piece by piece by piece sending precursor chemicals to make illicit fentanyl to Mexico. Okay. So now we have all the ingredients to make illicit fentanyl in Mexico. And now we have insert the Mexican cartels, and primarily the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco cartel, which is also sometimes referred to as CJNG, Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion. Sinaloa cartel and CJNG are the two elephants in the room. They're the monsters. They're the savages. They're the two biggest, most violent cartels that are affecting certainly Mexico. They have Mexico locked it down, but these two cartels are the ones that then intake all of these precursor chemicals. They then, with the help of Chinese individuals, build the illicit fentanyl. They inject or they lace and they build in the fentanyl into methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine. Certainly, we have seen instances of marijuana as well. And the one thing that we really like to talk about right now, too, and for quite some time, are fake pharmaceutical pills, fake pills. And then all of this is flooded north over the southwestern border into the United States. So that is just a really quick 2-minute, 3-minute rundown, right? Precursor chemicals, they start in Asia, primarily China. We have seen some indications of India, go into Mexico, put in every drug known under mankind, and push north into the United States. What that boils down to is, and this is right, John, you're a lively, upbeat guy. I try to be a lively, upbeat guy. You and I have had many wonderful, fun, laughable conversations, great topics, emergency management, the joy of helping communities, right? This is a tough topic to talk about because people are dying. And in 2023 alone, and we have seen this number every year increase, in 2023 alone, we lost 111,000 Americans to all of drugs, opioids, synthetic opioids, non-opioids. That's 111,000 Americans. That equates to roughly 300 people a day, Americans a day die from drugs. Okay. Now we talk about fentanyl. Out of that 111,000 that died in 2023, roughly 70%, which kicks out to 70,000 plus Americans, died from fentanyl last year. And that's like 200 or 205 Americans a day. If you think about an airliner, right? And I won't say any specific airliner because I don't want to get you in trouble for, hey, X, Y, and Z. But you think about any airliner a day holds, I'm in the Midwest, but I'm from back east. So I am frequently flying back east. And I get on the airplane and there are 200 plus people on this airplane. And I can't tell you, John, how many times I've thought, this is how many Americans are dying a day from illicit fentanyl. Thank you, China. Thank you, Mexico. So when we talk about the most urgent threat, back to emergency management, right? We always talk about threats. Fentanyl is the most urgent drug threat that we have seen in DEA ever. Like I said, I'm in my 25th year. I've been in different cities, and this is crazy. This is the scariest time we've ever seen. And when you think about how many people are dying a day, just take outside, move away from that 111,000. Let's just focus on the 70-some thousand from fentanyl alone.
Yeah.
200 plus Americans a day. That's why we like to say, right, scream from the rooftops. That's why getting on this podcast with you, we're very thankful for this opportunity because this helps us to, quote unquote, scream from the rooftops, the fear and the perils of fentanyl. And, to go a bit further down the rabbit hole on this, again, it's not just, fentanyl is just a methamphetamine, or if I use cocaine, I won't be affected. Here in my area, I'm trying to think if it was back 2 or 3 months ago, I saw the last coroner's report, and 50%, maybe like 51% of all the overdose deaths in my local area were linked to cocaine laced with fentanyl. So here you have cocaine, which is stimulant, right? and you have an opiate, which is like a kind of a downer, right? And you bring these two drugs together, and it's just, and people think opioids, heroin, uh, oxycodone, right? People aren't thinking opiates with cocaine or opiates with synthetic stimulant called methamphetamine.
Mm.
Fentanyl is in everything right now, and that's the problem. You can't escape it.
So this touches really close to home for me, this conversation. When I was 18, a friend of mine started using meth. I was living in Ohio. He lived in California, moved to California. He got arrested right before he turned 18. And the one of the doctors that was working with him in the jail, because he's underage, told his mother what was being said. And he said he could trust this. The only person he could trust anymore was this weird kid from Ohio. So my friend was getting out of jail, and his mom called me and said, "Hey, is there any way you could move to California to help him out?" And he was intelligent, he was clever, he was funny, and I lived with him for about 6 months in California. We got an apartment together, and he was gone. Like, even after all that, he's just stupid. There's no other way to say it. He just had lost the light, and he worked really, really hard to get some of that stuff back. He went to college. He ended up getting married. They ended up having a kid. And I went out to a NATO meeting in 2021. So this is like now 2006 or 2005 to, I don't know, I guess it was 2004. 2004 to 2021. That much amount of time had passed. And I went out to a NATO meeting and I saw him, and I was blown away. All the progress that he had made completely gone. He left his wife and his newborn baby because, that was apparently stressful, and he turned back to cocaine and meth. And I couldn't even interact with the guy. You fast forward, he's now in jail because he started using meth again, robbed a bunch of banks, and pointed a gun at a bunch of police officers, and now he's been in the jail for the rest of his life. And so, I've seen that regression up close from a personal friend, but everybody has their story. I wouldn't say it's a funny question or a ridiculous question, but maybe it's a little lighthearted, but I honestly cannot figure it out, right? I get it. Once people are addicted, they have no control anymore. I've seen it personally with my friend. I get that. But the amount of deaths, what it does to people, how they act, all the stuff, and the rate of death, I can't understand. This is going to sound ridiculous, and I'm prefacing that it is ridiculous from everybody's standpoint. I'm a business owner. It seems like the worst business model in the world to give something that not only kills your customer, but the customers can see other people using it and say, that's not great. And yet they're still getting clients. Why? The question for me is, from the DEA's perspective, the psychology of what's this happening, and if emergency managers are all about messaging and helping out the community, from a messaging standpoint, have we figured out the why, and how are we addressing the why? Does that make sense? It doesn't seem smart from any angle. Yeah, you get the money, but you're losing your clients, and the other people. Why would they even touch it? I don't know. I can't figure it out.
Yeah, well, heroin. I think of heroin, and I spent several years in DEA Baltimore, and heroin was really adversely affecting, right? The city of Baltimore. It was a lot of people were addicted to heroin, and a lot of people were dying through heroin use. And this was a long time ago, but I seem to recall that at that point, heroin was only about 18 to 20% pure. The rest of it was just junk, and people were still highly addicted to it and dying. Okay, now fast forward, you lace heroin with fentanyl. Well, fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin. So I think about these individuals, these poor souls in Baltimore, which is a great city, who really struggled with addiction issues at 18% pure heroin. Now you pile on top of that something, AKA illicit fentanyl, which is 50 times more potent than that. It's a recipe for disaster. And for those of you who are watching, I'm going to use a prop here. And for those of you who are just listening, I'll describe it. But when we talk about, why fentanyl is so deadly and how it can be so really addictive, but more deadly, the prop here is I have a pen, and 2 milligrams of fentanyl is enough to fit on the tip of a pen or a pencil, right? 2 milligrams, enough to fit on the top of a pen. That's a deadly lethal dose. And when we talk about why we're losing, and I'll get back to the cartel side of it, but when we talk about why people are so drawn to this, you think about the potency of it and how highly potent it is, and then you also think about the amount of it. Enough to fit on the tip of your ballpoint pen is 2 milligrams, and that's enough to kill you. And that's why we're losing 70,000 plus. And think about that. That's if you have a tenth of a gram of heroin, which fits in a capsule, a small gelatin capsule, you can easily put 2 milligrams of fentanyl to drive the addiction, to drive the customer to come back. You can easily drop that much into a tenth of a gram of heroin, of a gelatin capsule. And the whole idea, and you said, John, and you're right, we know this is all about money, and it's all about bringing in the customer, bringing the customer back. And quite frankly, whether it's local, right? Because local, regional, domestic drug trafficking organizations, we're very hard on China, and we should be. We're very hard on Mexico, the cartels, and we should be. But we also have to remind ourselves that we have Americans who are pushing this stuff as well, right?
Absolutely.
And it's very easy for them to lose a customer or two or three or four or five, because they know those that don't die are now even hooked that much more because fentanyl is in there. And also, if somebody dies or overdoses, somebody else might have the attitude, and this is true, hey, that's some really potent stuff. I'm trying to get the best drive, the best high, the best response out of this. That must be some really good heroin or meth. I want to go try that. So it drives the customer base back. Now that's locally. On the cartel side, it's the same thing. It's a cost of business for them. China certainly doesn't care about American lives dying.
Sure.
Cartels, yeah, they probably don't like it because it certainly gives them a bad name. But there are so many people using this stuff out there, and it's almost like the ratio of the amount of people that are actually truly struggling with addiction and substance use dependency, as opposed to the amount of people that are dying. It's still worth their effort, they think, to push this stuff forward, because it's driving money. The amount of money, and I got to say now, just as a quick spin off of this, talking about money, right? We're very hard on China, to go back to it, right? They're very turn a blind eye. They allow all these precursor chemicals to be sent. But what we have to constantly, and I pinch myself as a reminder, even within DEA, we have to constantly remind ourselves that the Chinese are expert money launderers. So they're killing us on the front end by getting us hooked to fentanyl. And then they're financially killing us on the back end by taking our money, our American dollars, money laundering it back to the cartels, which are then, of course, helping out Chinese chemical companies as well. Yes. China is really, we talk about threats, right? In emergency management, threat identification, threat assessment. Well, China is a threat. We are under attack when it comes to drugs, thanks to China. And, we really don't think about that a lot, because it's the southwestern border in Colombia, Central America, and Mexico, and sometimes the Middle East. We're really not thinking about China. Interesting. But we need to, because they're getting us, and they're getting us good.
So that begs the question, right? And I thank you for breaking that down. And quite frankly, it's mind-boggling. I will do one tangent before I go into this last segment here. I had somebody on here maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and we talked about human trafficking, especially sex trafficking. And, we blame all the outside groups. And honestly, they're feeding it, and so we kind of should. But the part that really gets me is the supply, not just the supply chain mechanism, but the supply and the demand. The demand is what's very concerning to me from all these angles. You're 100% right when you talk about it. It is actually getting to Americans because, not only can they go after Americans, but Americans are buying. Americans are using. And from talking about Super Bowls and human trafficking, the huge human trafficking problem at Super Bowls, and the drug problem, and it's only increasing. And from a cultural perspective in the U.S., those are very dangerous precedents because that means culturally things are changing where people are accepting very dangerous things into their lives, and that is spreading. And you look at the active shooter, epidemic, you look at all this other stuff, those are cultural problems. Those are like outcomes of a cultural problem, like the drugs, the human trafficking, the active shooter, all that stuff. Those are all symptoms of something else. And when I talked to the National Guard back in last September, I think, they asked me what's the number one threat in the U.S. right now. And I said it's our own culture that's changing. Maybe it's always been there. I don't know. But allowing these horrible things into daily life is very concerning for me. And honestly, like as part of the DEA, I want to ask you to talk about American culture. But from my standpoint, it's dangerous for me from a threat analysis perspective. From the emergency manager who's listening, whether they're in the private sector, like they're working for some big corporation, or they're working at a university, or they're in the public safety. This is probably more of a public safety thing, county, state, federal. What can actual emergency managers do to support the DEA's mission to destroy this stuff and really help out? Because in every disaster, there's some areas where we can't even go into because it's so bad. How do we better coordinate with the DEA on this kind of stuff?
This is a fantastic connection, right, between a law enforcement drug discussion and tying this to emergency management. And I really got to thank you, John, for putting that connection together. You said this is an emergency management, homeland security matter that we need to talk about. So you're bringing this to your podcast, you're bringing this to light, and for all emergency managers, right? And then this is the problem right now with the fentanyl crisis and the drug crisis. We say it's three-pronged. We're talking about threats. It's a threat to public safety, it's a threat to public health, and it's a threat, as we just talked about with China and Mexico, to national security. When I think about emergency management, and I'm not an emergency manager, I'm a law enforcement official. I have, as you know, you were my professor, academic background in emergency management, but not, I'm not an emergency manager. But we know about those 5 mission areas, right, in emergency management, part of the national preparedness goal: prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. And as I was thinking about those 5 areas, and then the core capabilities broken down out of that before coming on your show, I thought, wow. Right now, because we're losing 70,000 plus Americans a year to fentanyl, 111,000 Americans a year plus to drugs as a whole, how can this not be in the emergency management realm of conversations, right? There is prevention, there is protection to be done, there is mitigation through education, there is response when we get, incidents, and then there's certainly recovery. So, this is very much an emergency management topic. And I think very much whether it is a medical, paramedic or a doctor, or if there's some sort of county, local, statewide emergency manager. FEMA certainly, I think, has a role in this. 18 to 45, John, is the age range for the leading. How can I put this? In America, here we go. In America, 18 to 45, that age range, the leading cause of death for 18 to 45-year-olds in America, drug poisonings. And we say poisonings, by the way, because back to the counterfeit pills, somebody takes an oxycodone that they think is an oxycodone, or they take an Adderall, highly used and abused on college campuses. If they're not getting their oxycodones or Adderalls or Percocets or Xanax from a doctor or from a brick and mortar, there's no such thing as internet pharmacies, by the way. You got to get your pharmaceuticals from brick and mortar pharmacies. If you're not getting your pharmaceuticals that way, and you're getting your fake pills from somebody on your college campus or somebody down the street or a friend, the problem is, as we go back to it, right? All these fake pills are manufactured in Mexico. They're all with fentanyl, and that emergency managers. We want to talk about threat assessment. Well, we're losing 200 Americans a day. I think emergency managers and emergency management as a study should be all over this. And you're all over it, and we're all over it. But I do think there could be more discussion and more ways for emergency management to kind of dive into this to help. But at the end of the day, we are under attack by the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco cartel. It is, for the most part, still a law enforcement matter. And our job as law enforcement officers is to hold organizations, drug trafficking organizations, accountable. Our job is to investigate, bring them to the grand jury for indictment, and go out and arrest them and bring them to an American court in the American criminal justice system and put them behind bars for the rest of their life, just like Chapo Guzman, who was the head of the Sinaloa cartel. He's sitting behind bars for the rest of his life for the horror and the damage that he did to America. And quite frankly, the world.
Yeah.
So it is a law enforcement matter because people are dying. It's a public safety, public health matter, and certainly a national security matter. And emergency management, is really, whether emergency management knows it or not, it's definitely a part of this, and it needs to be. And we need their help because we're all about force multipliers. Law enforcement just can't do it alone. We go out. We're on podcast. We speak with the communities. We go out to the schools. We need to really kind of get this message out because we don't want people, dying. I mean, that's at the end of the day, we're just trying to save lives.
There's multiple compliments I'm going to give you in rapid fire because, one, I appreciate you bringing this to light on our podcast, and hopefully a lot of emergency managers listening in and maybe adjacent who are emergency services kind of woke up and say, hey, this is something I need to focus on. And I would implore everybody to reach out to their local DEA, especially those in public safety, and say, hey, like, how can we help? What's the right, area of focus here that we can collaborate on and attack this. And so huge shout out for you for coming out here and being kind of that voice for us to get out to, the tens of thousands who listen. However, I was starting to smile because you have extensive media training, and I think you had a pretty good communications instructor at St. Louis University, and I could hear you as you were talking, repeating your talking points as you're walking through here. You said the short, powerful statements, what you're supposed to say. You're saying it with clarity. You're allowing people to, you're using examples as you're explaining. And so you've walked through the whole thing. You could give several master classes. You could give a master class in communications. You could give a master class in professionalism. You could give a master class in keeping the passion and being a forever learner. I have so much respect for you. It is, for a guy who talks for a living, it's kind of actually it's hard to find words to appreciate everything that you both bring into the DEA and, our friendship. And, I've had the great honor of meeting your wife. You've met my intern. You guys are besties. She's always excited to hear you guys. But like the whole deal, just I have the highest respect for you and of course the DEA, and yeah, take out the cartels, like all the way, go all the way. And I hope for a drug-free America. I hope for a culture in America that recognizes that it's embracing ideologies and worldly concepts that will not lead them to happiness. And I'll kind of leave that one there. But Chip, again, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. If you have one final statement, one final push that you could say to anybody in the field, especially if they're listening in, what would be your closing statement?
Again, thank you, John. You're always very kind, and it's been great being here with you today. And I look forward to our continued friendship. And I do congratulate you on your successful podcast. And I'm a listener. I'm not just an attendee today. I actually am a listener. So, no, I think for anybody in the emergency management field, I really goes back to what I said earlier. If you have that passion and even just that sense that, yeah, I want to help people, I want to help our community, stay at it. Stay at it. And you know what? Life is not always about how much money you make. You got to get out of bed every morning. You got to have that drive. And you got to really, at least I'm only speaking for myself. I want to be able to make sure I'm doing something for my nation, my community. And that's really what drives me. And also it's a lot of fun too. You get to meet great people, vocation-driven individuals. Leadership is all about passion, right? And there's nothing better than being surrounded by like-minded, passion, leader-driven individuals. And that's part of the joy of being in public safety as well, in emergency management. You're surrounded by like-minded people who want to do well for our nation, for our communities, and for each other. So now more than ever, we need emergency managers. Now more than ever, we need public safety officers, law enforcement officers. Stay at it, and let's dismantle, disrupt, and destroy the drug cartels. Let's make America drug-free. That's DEA's goal. If DEA comes out with a drug-free America, that's our goal. That is our goal. And let's save some lives. Let's save some lives.
Chip, once again, thank you for joining me on the podcast and for the several times that you could have just dropped the mic and walked out while you were talking. For everybody who's listening in, I'm going to give a big shout out to Chip. I know he's been 25 years in the DEA. If he ever wants to get out and become an emergency manager, you make him your director immediately. He's a phenomenal leader, great guy, and honestly, he can run FEMA or otherwise. So, Chip, thanks again for coming on. I'm going to reiterate the three things that he said because I care about saving and sustaining life. If you care about saving and sustaining life in public safety, in public health, and national security, you pay attention to this topic. It will drastically help you as you're trying to do that mission set of saving and sustaining life. If you got something out of this podcast episode, which you should have, everybody, I got something. I got lots of things out of it. I wore a suit for it. So for that alone, I want you to give us a 5-star rating and subscribe. And if you have any questions for Chip, of course, you can reach out to us and we'll send it over to him. You can put your questions or ideas, especially if you've found solutions that have worked in your community. Put it on social media. Let the community see it. And let's work together to to save and sustain life where we go. And with that, we'll see you for the next one. Peace.